Now we have a different RonKim. It's a RonKim day. Let me read the bio for our Commissioner RonKim. Ron is currently an attorney in private practice focusing on consumer protection and employee right litigation. For 6 years, he served the city of Saratoga Springs as Commissioner of Public Safety, where he led and managed the city's largest department, which includes police and fire/EMS. Ron is one of, if not the first Asian American elected officials in the history of New York State. Ron is a graduate of Glens Falls High School, Colgate University, the University of Chicago, and Fordham Law School. He has worked for the National Civic League and was the founder of the Environmental Federation of New York. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome RonKim.
Thanks very much for the great introduction. I don't know if you all watch MSNBC, but I put this up. It's instructive on many levels. But some of you know for the last 6 months I've been running for Congress in the 21st District, which is really the northern part of the state. It essentially starts in Glens Falls, goes up to Plattsburgh and out to Watertown. Well, Dylan Radigan entered the race very late, about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And because he used to be a host on MSNBC, he was getting a lot of national press. So in their desire to be fair, when they interviewed him one night, this was the night before I was to go up to Plattsburgh, they flashed all our pictures up. And so, as you can see, RonKim, much better looking, much younger, all the rest, okay? So anyway, the next night I had to go to Plattsburgh to talk to the Democratic committee up there because they were interviewing all the candidates. So I started out my talk, I said, you probably don't recognize me, or you think I just gained about 25 pounds at 20 years older, because, and you know, they were all very entertained by this. But it's instructive because, you know, basically I think the reporters were just doing a search and said, oh, he must be in politics and it can only be one RonKim. So this has actually happened to us, and there was a flurry of emails back and forth between the other RonKim and the real RonKim. So, anyway, I wanted to divide my talk into three. I wanted to start with some very practical, what do you do if you want to run for an office, any office, board of education, Congress, what have you. Then get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts of running, because there's an art to it, and there are things you can screw up, and there are things that are really important to consider. Not all are necessarily things that you might realize if you're just getting it. And then I want to talk, and it goes a little bit back to this, the sort of special issues that an Asian American has running for office. So first of all, if you're thinking about doing this, what's your goal? I suggest, particularly because of my own experience, that you start with something that is in the community, Board of Education, a town board. I actually ran for Commissioner of Public Safety as sort of my first time, but I had been involved in several other campaigns before that. In fact, a lot of what I'm going to say, I had experience both as a Republican and then as a Democrat. I'm one of the people that went from Republican. In the 1990s, I was actually a Republican and worked in Saratoga Springs at the grassroots, and then eventually went to the Democratic Party and was elected that way. So the first thing you want to do is sort of figure out what's your goal. The next thing is talk to some people who've done it, who either former office holders or people that have are in office. One of the people that I spoke to when I was in college, I really wanted to do this, was I grew up in Glens Falls, and the old congressperson, he's long past, Gerald Solomon, his son was, I went to school with him, and I went to him and I said, you know, I want to do this eventually. I want to be in politics. What should I do? He actually told me to move to Florida, but his advice was very good, because what he was sort of saying to me as we got to talk was, you know, New York is shrinking, and he saw this. This is back in the 1980s. He said, New York's shrinking. They're losing seats, and you know, Florida is a place where, you know, basically every census, every 10 years, there's new seats. And that was part of, you know, one of the things that later on, as I got older, I realized that was probably good advice. I just don't like hot weather, so I never decided to do that. And speak to people like H.P. Wayne. He's a great resource, you know, particularly, you know, in his experience, because that experience will help you sort of focus on what you need to do. You want to join stuff. Be a joiner. I was in Rotary Club in Saratoga Springs. I joined the Elks Club. I did a lot of volunteer activities. You're going to meet a lot of people that way, and that's really important too. This is a great organization, of course, but you want to also look at other business, fraternal organizations, volunteers, and that can really help you to sort of spread your network, get out there and meet more people, and then finally, you got to, unfortunately, in the New York system, you got to choose a party. There's, of course, the Democrat and Republicans. There is working families. There's the Independence Party, which some people don't even realize is actually a party. You'd be surprised at how many people think they're an independent, but they're actually part of the Independence Party. I, as I said, initially was a Republican. My father was a Republican. Growing up, he was an immigrant from Korea. He was a surgeon up in Glens Falls, and you know, that was our tradition. And but eventually, I did move to the Democratic Party. There are pros and cons with both of them. I've seen the insides of them on both sides. I can tell you stories that very positive stories about both parties. I'm glad where I am now. That's all I'd say about that. But and when you join a party, you want to make yourself useful. In my experience, there's two types of people that join parties. They're the people that want to talk about issues. That's great. You feel strongly about women's rights. You feel strongly about immigration policy. Definitely want to be part of a party. And sharing those beliefs and that information is good. But here's what party people will think is far more valuable, that you're willing to do the work. Because they don't have a lot of people that do that. So sure, if you've got some strong opinions, go for it. But here's the other thing you're going to do. You're going to collect signatures. You're going to knock on doors. And that's something that Yasmin mentioned. It's a very important function. And it's also something that people hate, generally speaking. But you know, if you make yourself useful, people are going to see that. Doesn't matter which party, but they're going to see this is a person that works hard and will knock on doors, make phone calls, do the very mechanics of what a party's all about. And there's not enough of those in any party. So if you're looking for sort of, you know, the in, that's a place, that's a way to really get an in. It's like what I say is sort of workers' bees. So what happens when you decide you want to, you focus on an office and you want to run? My advice first, definitely talk to your wife or your husband. Make sure they're on board, because it is I don't care if it's Board of Education, City Hall, Congress, whatever. It's a huge task. You're gonna be in a lot of meetings if you win. And you're going to be a lot of time when you're not at home and all the rest, so you need to have that support. Have a real strong, maybe you have a brother, sister, spouse, have a real strong sort of talk with yourself and those people about what your strengths and your weaknesses are. RonKim talked about this. One of the things everybody has to do is got to raise money on almost every level. And if that's not your strength, you got to find somebody that can help you with that. If your strength is you're a good person, a people person, but you might be a little weak on policy, you know, you want to find somebody that can help you with that. So have a honest talk about what you can do and what you can't. And those things you can't, find people that will help you with that, because that's going to be critical as you move forward. Look at your opponent. Hopefully you don't have one. An open seat is always a great thing. In my first run, I was running against the incumbent Commissioner of Public Safety and a state trooper who was a Republican. So there were the incumbent had a scandal, and he basically did not get the Republican nomination that year. The state trooper did. Wonderful man. I still see him all the time. He coached my daughters in lacrosse. He was an excellent person. And I thought I was going to lose, actually, because he was more qualified. I can say that we're on tape, right? But he was a really good person, and I liked him. But the problem was the Republicans had a scandal. This was, and we don't need to go into details, but basically, when I went into the race, I sort of thought there was a chance. I knocked on a lot of doors. I spoke at different functions, made sure I got my message out, and we won, and that was great. So look at your opponent, look at the calendar, very important. Figure out, sort of literally back out, how much time do you have to do for this, how much time you're going to do this. One of the things, you know, and I think all of the elected officials would say this, the most effective way of winning an office is knocking on doors. It is absolute, and here's the thing is, I left the congressional race. Part of the reason was that it became difficult to differentiate yourself, and Dylan Radigan's entry, I thought, sort of ruined my strategy. But I knocked on 1,200 doors in the last 2 months, throughout in Plattsburgh, in Glens Falls, etc. You learn a lot about people that way too. So it's not only helping you in your campaign, it helps you be a better candidate too. Because people do want to talk to you. And here's the other thing. If you say you're running for an office and you're there standing at their doorstep, they're going to remember that. And they're going to remember the person who did. So you know, if you run for any office, I think that's something you have to be willing to do in addition to raising money. The other sort of nuts and bolts part of running for an office in many cases is New York has this strange system where you can get these third-party endorsements. There's the Conservative Party on sort of the right. There's the Independence Party, maybe in the middle. It's hard to tell. It depends on who they're. And then there's the Working Families Party more. And then there's a few other ones actually that are even smaller. You have to look at those two. You're going to want to look to see if you can get an endorsement from them, because there are some people in a district that will say, I'm never going to vote for a Democrat, but you can be endorsed by the Independent Party and they'll vote for you. So it's an edge. Those are sometimes very competitive, both with the Republicans and Democrats, but it's something you want to do. And then here's the other thing. One of the things that I always had, and it always helped me win as far as I can tell, you got to have a good graphic artist or somebody who will do that work for you. Because if you get somebody who's able to do that stuff for you, it's invaluable. But those are sort of nuts and bolts things to think about if you're going to run. And I encourage you to do this. Special things about being an Asian American if you are thinking about running. I loved your comments. I thought they were wonderful. I've had those experiences. Best way to describe it is to tell you a story within a story. So I went up to Clinton County, which is up in Plattsburgh, to talk to one of the party these third parties I spoke about to get their endorsement. And they had about 30 people there. And you walked in and they were all around talking, asking you questions, basically. And one of them asked me, he said, if we give you this endorsement, we want to make sure that you've got the right stuff to sort of take this on. And can you take criticism? So I told him this story. I said, the best way I can answer that is, when I was a commissioner of public safety in Saratoga Springs, there was a gentleman who, for whatever reason, took an extreme disliking to me. And he used to go to city council meetings all the time, was there. He used to film me. And as my daughter says, you have one of those sort of resting sour faces that can beat anybody. So I always had to be very conscious, when he was, but anyway, this gentleman ended up having a blog that was actually followed by some local newspapers. And when I ran my second time, he put my head on a picture of my head, photoshopped it on a dog, and put it on his blog, and people were commenting about it. It actually made the local Saratogian newspapers. And then another time, he accused me of wanting to rename Saratoga Springs Ponyung Springs. And of course, this was all ridiculous. So when this question came to me in Clinton County, could I take the heat? I told him, I said, I've experienced that. I know what that's like. I even know it when it's racial, when it really is cutting. And by the way, this is not in this era. This was back in 2005, so this is when this all happened. So it's way before any of what we see today. And so I told this to this group who were very progressive liberals. And they laughed. Their reaction was to actually not really recognize that this was a sort of an offensive thing, and I was trying to describe this. And what was interesting, later on, the chairman of this meeting, who was Japanese American, came to me and he said, and I thought this was very wise of him, and I leave this, he said, white America doesn't really think we're minorities. They don't really appreciate that we have a different experience necessarily, but in a way they do. So that, and it's because the majority of Americans believe that a true minority is disadvantaged, and they don't see that. They see our children go to the best colleges. They see us in leaderships, in businesses. So they don't really see the part of being an Asian American that may be not as positive in terms of how people perceive you. And I thought it was very wise, and it's something to keep in mind that, we should, I love the premise of this conference, because we should be out there. We should be making sure that we are seen as a distinct interest group that wants to not only make sure our interests are represented, but give to the larger society, that we give something back. And I think sometimes people have not perceived that, and particularly in the majority community. So, in the end, go out, do it. Here's the one other thing I will say. I ran for Congress for 6 months. I loved it. I truly did love doing it. It's very emotional. Running for office is very emotional. You're putting yourself out there. People are going to criticize you, but there are a lot of people that are going to give you incredible support and it's very, very gratifying. So, go out and do it. If you ever need help, don't hesitate to call me. I'll be behind you. I can't guarantee if you're a Republican, I'm going to help you that much. So thanks very much. I appreciate it.